In today's video, I'll be giving you my top tips on shopping, prepping and cooking tofu that doesn't suck. Now you might be interested to know that I've been vegan for over 2 years before I started regularly eating and enjoying tofu as part of my main meals. And I actually credit beginning the low FODMAP diet with this, as I probably wouldn't have bothered experimenting with it again after those first few failed attempts. And the reason for this is that the low FODMAP serving size of tofu is more generous than any other protein-rich food for vegans, which means that it's much easier to create a satisfying, filling meal using tofu as the base than it is using any other type of legume. But if you're a tofu novice, then this might not be enough to encourage you to get started. And honestly, I get it. I hated tofu the first few times I tried it. And it took some dodgy meals and some trial and error for me to figure out exactly what worked and, more importantly, what didn't. Today, hopefully, I'm going to allow you to learn from my mistakes so that you can skip straight to the good part. So I wanted to start with the brand of tofu that's most accessible and affordable to me, and that's the Cauldron firm tofu. I'm sure many of you will be familiar with this brand, and until fairly recently it was the only brand regularly stocked by most major supermarkets. It's a plain variety, which means that you're going to want to flavour it really well before or during cooking. The great thing about this is that it absorbs any flavour that you throw at it like a sponge. The downside is that it takes more work than other varieties to get it to the point where you can be really enthusiastic about its flavour. The first thing you need to know before we attempt to get any flavour into here is that we need to get the water out. So even though this is a firm tofu, it's packed in water and the tofu itself holds a lot of water. Not only is that water going to wash away or dilute any flavour that we try to introduce, it's also going to make it difficult to achieve a yummy, crisp texture when we cook it. More importantly, for anyone with gut issues or on a low FODMAP diet, this water is the main source of those pesky water-soluble FODMAPs, namely GOS and fructans, which can be slow and difficult to digest for some people. The more water we can squeeze out, the fewer FODMAPs will remain in the tofu and the easier it'll be on our gut. The best place to remove the water is over the sink, because in this brand especially it's completely covered and starts to leak out as soon as you open the packet. You can squeeze the water out by hand, which is surprisingly therapeutic to do, but the most thorough way of removing as much water as possible is to use a purpose-made tofu press, which I don't own, or in a colander with something heavy on top to press the water out. Another top tip for helping to get the maximum amount of water out is to freeze the tofu before pressing, but I'll get into that a little bit later. So if we stick with tackling the flavour for now, then I'd like to show you a grocery haul of my favourite flavoured tofu varieties that are typically only available to me online. I bought these from the Vegan Kind supermarket, hashtag not sponsored, but I will leave an affiliate discount code in the description box below. And so I've realised that for me, smoked tofu is without a doubt my favourite. Some varieties, you do need to experiment. Some varieties are delicious straight from the packet. This is one of them. The Taifun is my absolute favourite tofu that I've ever tried. It's really difficult to get hold of where I live. It's more expensive than the standard supermarket brands. Things like the Cauldron and the tofu that you're probably used to seeing, especially here in the UK supermarkets. So it is a more premium end price and product, but it really is very different to the standard supermarket ones that you can get. It's a very firm, almost a crumbly texture, and unfortunately my absolute favourite tofu was actually out of stock currently, but it's the Taifun tofu xoxo, which is I think it's got tomato and peppers. It's a red one, and that I could literally eat the entire pack straight from the packet. It's absolutely delicious, and that again has got a really firm crumbly texture, and that is fantastic to use in a bolognese or a chilli in place of mince. I'm not sure if the tofu xoxo is suitable for a low FODMAP diet. This one definitely is. This is soybeans, water, soy sauce, which of course is safe on the low FODMAP diet, but obviously not for my celiac friends. Sea salt and beech wood smoke, along with the magnesium and the calcium preservatives that they need to make the tofu. So there's no onion or garlic in that. If you are purchasing a smoked brand, then I do recommend that you do double check to make sure there is no onion and garlic, because I think there are a couple in the Taifun range that do have onion and garlic. But this, if you've never ever tried tofu before, then I absolutely recommend that this is the first one that you start with, because it's really, really good. And honestly, this really has ruined tofu for me, because like I say, it's too expensive for me to buy on a frequent basis. It's not something that I can get hold of. I do have to purchase this one online, so it's not readily available, but it really does blow all the tofus out of the water. Unlike a lot of the other brands I've tried, the smoke flavour does seem to go right through to the centre. It isn't just on the outer rim, which tends to be the case with a lot of other smoked tofus that I've tried, but definitely give this one a go. This is another brand of smoked tofu that I've had before. I think it's called Veggie Kitchen Viana. Again, this one is suitable for the low FODMAP diet. And this has got a really nice smoky flavour and a really extra firm texture, which is perfect on the low FODMAP diet, because the less water you can press out of it, the less water that's in there, the lower in FODMAPs it will be. And again, this has got a really beautiful smoky flavour, but this for me, because it's so deep, this is an example of one of the varieties where the majority of the flavour does tend to be on the outside, and the inside is quite few shades paler than the outside, just because obviously the flavouring is on the outside. But I think because it is quite a deep block, that flavour doesn't fully penetrate into the centre. Still delicious, and like I say, this is a really good option for things like slicing into like small bacon slices, because it is very firm. And this one does slice quite smoothly, if I remember. The Taifun, although you don't ever really get a lot of water pressing out of it, it has got a much more crumbly texture. So this one isn't great for slicing as a bacon alternative or anything like that. This I find is much better crumbled rather than attempting to slice. And this Clearspot brand, despite the fact that it is handmade in my mother county of Yorkshire, this isn't actually one that I've tried before, so I will let you know once I've tried it. This one, just based on appearances, looks to me to be very similar to the tofu variety that you can get in the supermarket. So it looks like it's going to be quite lightly smoked, and again that the smoky flavour tends to be just on the outer edges, and this looks like it's probably going to be quite light inside, but it does look nice and firm. There is more water in there than in the other two varieties, so I will be sure to give that a nice good press before I attempt to use it. But it's a nice hefty piece there, and I will definitely let you know how that is once I've tried it. And I'll just double check. And this one again, it's just soybeans, nigari and sea salt. So again, that is suitable for the low FODMAP diet, but do double check. But if you can find some of these brands and experiment with some of these smoked brands, then I really do recommend you try, because you can see that a lot of the work has been done for you in not only pressing them so that they're nice and firm, but also into getting maximum flavour into the tofu before you even come across it for your recipe. So if you are short on time, or you're not overly experienced in the kitchen and you're a bit unsure about flavourings and marinades, then these are definitely the ones to begin with. And although I know they're quite different, I just wanted to also touch upon the fact that this will be my first time in trying tempeh. Despite the fact that I've been vegan since 2015, I've never ever tried tempeh. Again, because it's not something that is very readily available where I live, and because it does tend to be either a little bit more expensive or of an equal price with the tofu. But because I know that I like and enjoy the tofu, sometimes I'm a little bit wary of investing that same amount of money into something when I'm not sure if I'm going to like it. So like I say, because I did actually have the voucher that I won, I thought there was nothing lost in me attempting to try it. So I got a few different types. So this is the brand that I have seen out and about in supermarkets and health food shops near where I live. So this probably would be the brand that I would be able to get hold of most readily. The reason that I did try some other brands is because I do know that the tempeh can be quite an acquired taste, and it often does need quite a bit of work to get flavour into there that's strong enough to overpower the natural tempeh flavour. So I am interested to try this and give my own opinion on it, but I just wanted to show, because tempeh is suitable and listed in the Monash app for the low FODMAP diet. It is higher in protein and it's a much less processed product than the tofu. And then just because I knew that this variety does come in the, I think that must be the water that it's fermented in, I wanted to try a drier version. This is the Better Nature tempeh, and this is original smoked. It looks very, very lightly smoked, but that is extremely firm and dry with no excess liquid whatsoever. So I thought that that might be a bit easier to flavour than the one that has been sitting soaking in the water. And this one again is another product from the Clearspot range, and that one is not as dry or firm as the Better Nature, but it's getting there. It's definitely drier than the Viana. And again, this is I don't think that one, this one isn't even smoked. This is as it comes, so that's probably a really good one to see exactly how easy it is to get flavour into there. So I just wanted to point that out while we're talking about tofu. They're probably a video in themselves, because I do understand that it is quite a different process trying to get the flavour into these, and there is a bit of prep involved in getting them to the stage that you might want them at for your recipes. But I just wanted to give a quick run through just to show you that the tofu does come in very different formats, and it really is about finding the one that you personally enjoy, finding the one that suits your budget, finding the one that with the flavour profile that you enjoy, the texture that you enjoy, and experimenting whether you prefer to flavour your own. So buying the plain ones. The plain varieties are usually always cheaper than the smoked varieties. Whether you prefer something firmer that can be sliced, such as these, or whether you'd rather have something that can be crumbled into a chili or a bolognese, that kind of thing. And I do encourage you to experiment with them, because if you just try one and think you don't like it, there are so many different types out there, so many different varieties, quite a few different flavours now, and it is definitely worth experimenting to see which one suits you best. Now, when we talk about whether or not someone enjoys tofu, then flavour is only one factor, the other major factor being texture. I often find that this is a bigger sticking point for most people, as the texture of tofu really is quite unique and can take some getting used to. So assuming you're using firm tofu, which is the most FODMAP friendly and versatile option, then as I mentioned in the tofu haul, the biggest factors that determine texture is the brand. However, there are still a few tricks you can use to manipulate that texture to your liking and to suit your recipe. So remember that tofu we froze earlier? Not only does that help to remove the water, but freezing has a big effect on the texture. The simplest way to freeze tofu is to do as I do and just put the entire pack straight into the freezer as it is. And because I'm usually cooking 2 to 4 meals at a time, I pull it out when I know I'll be using the full pack. If you're cooking in smaller quantities, then feel free to portion out the tofu first and freeze and defrost it in amounts that make sense for you. If you do it this way, I recommend draining off the excess water first, whereas if you freeze the whole block, you'll need to drain it once it's thawed. So I'm going to show you a side-by-side comparison of the fresh versus the pre-frozen and thawed tofu so you can see the difference. Here we have the pre-frozen tofu, and because we froze it as it comes, this still contains the excess water it was packaged in. So first we need to drain that off and then we can take a closer look. So once we've drained the excess water, we still need to press the tofu, but I just wanted to show you close up how freezing the tofu has expanded the natural holes and spaces that run throughout, which then allows more of the water to be squeezed out with less effort and leaves behind these pockets that are perfect for absorbing your marinade. If we compare that to the fresh tofu, you might not be able to see an immediate difference, but you can definitely feel it with your fingers, and that difference in texture becomes much more obvious when we begin to break the tofu apart. So the fresh tofu splits apart smoothly and easily in a similar way to breaking apart the white of a hard-boiled egg. And sorry to my vegan friends, but that's the only way I can think to describe it. This makes it great to use in recipes such as scrambled tofu, tofu benedict, omelette, quiche, or mix it with chives, parsley, cheese and mayo in a sandwich or salad. Whereas the pre-frozen tofu tears more roughly, leaving behind a more fibrous, uneven edge, similar to breaking apart a loaf of day-old bread with your hands. And that's actually a really good example because I think that uncut bread is a perfect way to describe the texture of pre-frozen tofu. Lots of people describe it as meaty, but I think it's more accurate to say chewy and dense. This gives it a bit more bite, which works well in curry, bolognese, chili, stir-fry, soups, stews, and as breaded nuggets or schnitzel. Hopefully this side-by-side close-up really shows those physical texture changes that I'm trying to describe. Then once it's been properly pressed and drained, you can use it however makes sense for your recipe. For most dishes, I prefer to tear it rather than cut it to give me that rough edge just begging to soak up a marinade. But the number one way I recommend it to anyone that's new to tofu or still unsure about its texture is to grate it. This method is what I use to get me into eating tofu, and I can't praise it highly enough. Grating the tofu works well whether it's fresh or pre-frozen. It gives tiny uniform pieces that almost dissolve into a recipe, and when it's prepared this way, most people don't even realise they're eating it, let alone feel offended by it. This shredded tofu is perfect in a salad, noodle soup, stew, or my personal favourite, fried rice. The huge surface area means it readily absorbs flavours, so much so that I often don't even bother to marinate it beforehand anymore. I'll just happily throw it in with the rest of the ingredients and let it soak up the flavour as it cooks, which makes it a great quick and easy or last minute recipe option. So I couldn't end this video without showing you how I use tofu in a recipe. And here's an example of how I'd prepare it for maximum flavour in a family-friendly fried rice. Add your oil of choice to a non-stick pan or skillet. Allow the oil to heat and pop a piece of tofu in the pan until it sizzles. Add the rest of the tofu shreds evenly across the surface of the pan. Allow it to sizzle for a few minutes before stirring it up and leaving it to sizzle again. You eventually want the shreds to be lightly brown and slightly crisp throughout. After 5 minutes, sprinkle over a stock cube, low FODMAP if required. Add any flavourings before any liquid really helps them to penetrate and stick to the surface of the tofu before being diluted into the rest of the dish. Now's a great time to add in the rest of your spices. Here I'm using curry powder, and I'll leave a link to a homemade low FODMAP version below. Now get ready to see a quick glimpse of the finished tofu once it's done, as my camera stops working round about now. So the entire footage from this recipe failed to record, but that's okay because this video is just to show you what's possible and to give you a taste of how you can make tofu work for you. And it hopefully helped you to see that tofu doesn't have to suck. I'll have more dedicated tofu recipe videos coming up over the next few weeks to give you more ideas on how to cook and enjoy this vegan-friendly, FODMAP-friendly, high-protein staple. Thanks so much for watching, and if you made it this far, then drop me an emoji in the comments that best describes your opinion of tofu after watching this video. I'll see you soon. Bye!